in cities, not only in terms of health problems, but as well in terms of health solutions. And I have this feeling that this year's conference accomplished its goal. And in his opening lecture, Michel Kazachkin pointed that health is a political choice. And this year, we had the representatives from the local and regional authorities from different countries that were participating and engaging in the conference. Coming back as well, or referring to what Andrei Klepikov said a day ago in the morning, I do really hope that you had the opportunity and the chance to see the non-standard solutions that have been described to address pending problems that we face in public health. And I truly believe that, and I hope and believe that the learning will pay dividends in the future. So the final session of the City Health Conference has its own tradition. So it includes presenting the Paolo Pертика Award, the delivery of Alison and Eddie Memorial Lecture, and as the last act, we have the handover to the host of next year's conference. So let me start with Paolo Pертика Award. So the award was established in 2004 by the European Network of Drugs and Infections Prevention in Prisons, and was made in honor of Paolo's work with prisoners relating to ensure access to help, access to the help and treatment for the people that were at their most vulnerable. And the aim of this award is to recognize the outstanding contribution in public health within the criminal justice context in relation to drugs and alcohol users, which can be shown to have positive impact both at the individual and general level. Unfortunately, Paolo cannot be here today with us due to personal reasons, but he sent us a message for this year's recipients. And I will kindly ask Paddy Costello, the Director of Knowledge Exchange, to present it on his behalf, as Paddy was working alongside Paolo for many years. Paddy?
Well, my notes are up there.
Would you like me to pass them?
Thank you, Kasia. As Kasia said, I was very fortunate to work with Paolo for quite a number of years. I was his manager. He aged me. The man was an absolute bundle of energy. He campaigned and worked tirelessly on behalf of people in prison who were there as a result of drug-related offences. He was also instrumental in starting the first European network of drug services in prisons. And I'm delighted to present this award on his behalf. And I know that he would have been delighted to be here too, but unfortunately he was unable to. So, our recipient this year is a physician who has worked as a surgeon at the Central Penitentiary Hospital in Moldova, commencing in 1995. From 1997, he was involved in the design, delivery, and monitoring of programs to combat TB within prisons in the Republic of Moldova. And these included in the year 2000, implementing a pilot project on needle and syringe exchange in prisons. What was known as the Moldovan model for interventions with drug users in prison, it involved a range of services, including clean needles, condoms, substitute prescribing, and counselling. And it's one that's been presented and discussed as an example of good practice at many conferences and seminars, including a large number where Paolo and myself were actually involved. And a key feature of this model, which was unusual for the region at the time, was that it involved NGOs in the delivery of services in the prisons, which was something that made the approach very special at that time. The lead that Moldova's penitentiary system took in acknowledging that, as in prisons worldwide, it was impossible to prevent illegal drugs from entering facilities and to stop prisoners from having sex with one another. And in response to this, in no small way, credit should be given to the recipient of the award. So, since his work with the prison service, he managed the Republic of Moldova's tuberculosis program implementation unit, which was financed by the World Bank and the Global Fund. And since 2006, he's been working at the Global Fund as a fund portfolio manager for tuberculosis, HIV, and malaria grants for several Eastern European countries. So, as someone who spent many years campaigning for and designing services for drug users in prisons, it's especially pleasing to make this award today to Dumitru, I hope I get this word right, Latishevsky. Please. It's not compulsory, but...
Yeah, but still, life's an interesting thing. I wanted to be a surgeon and it got me into prison. I was impatient for my professors to, I don't know, retire and give me space, so I went to the prison hospital and look where it got me.
Thank you, Paddy, and congratulations to Dumitru. So, turning to our memorial lecture, we have this annual tradition to deliver the lecture in memory of Alison, Chesney and Eddie Killoran. They were both individuals who dedicated their life works to the drugs field and harm reduction in UK, and they are still much missed by their family and friends. And I'm delighted to say that this year's lecture will be delivered by Professor Дэвид Уилсон. Professor Дэвид Uilson is the health director at the World Bank, and he has giving or providing strategic advices for many governments. David is well known for participants of our city health conferences, as he attended and spoke at several. And as organizers, we have valued his continued interest and support, and that is why we are delighted that he's joining us here in Odessa. In 2012, in London, during the first City Health Conference, David delivered a presentation entitled Urban Health, War Health. And in this presentation, he outlined the challenges for the health and of increasingly urbanized world with the phenomenon of megacities. And today, he will revisit the topic and focus particularly on how the issues of urbanization impact on the regions such Eurasia. So, David?
Thank you very much indeed. It's an honor to deliver this memorial lecture at the close of this meeting in Odessa. And I just begin by saying, as we all know, that the last century has seen unprecedented progress in health and human development. And just to illustrate this, the number of people living in extreme poverty fell from 50% in the 1980s, when many of us were alive, to under 10% today. Similarly, life expectancy has increased more in the last 50 years than in the previous 2,000 years. And finally, take things like childhood deaths, maternal mortality, and malaria. They have halved since 1990, a period that's very close in the memory of many of us. And it's clear that the magic quintet of improved nutrition, sanitation, living standards, vaccines, and antibiotics have caused most of these extraordinary health gains. But conversely, it also means that many of the health challenges before us have fewer simple solutions and are far more complex and multidimensional in causation. And for the first time in history, we really have an opportunity to turn our focus from a life that's nasty, brutish, and short, from disease and early death, towards wellness and longevity. And this is certainly reflected in the aspirations of many of our new World Bank health projects that typically include aims such as aging, longevity, wellness. And yet, if we look at the components of our programs, they typically include hospital reform, integrated patient management, or provider incentives. In short, our interventions are almost entirely in the health sector, but the determinants of long and healthy lives are almost entirely outside the health sector. There's a profound mismatch. We're also living through a profound paradox. If things are so good, why do so many of us feel so apprehensive about the state of the world? And I think that paradox is at the heart of what we need to look at together. And I want to be clear, I don't mean to paint a dark or dystopic view of the future. On the contrary, but I can think of at least 4 reasons why we have this paradox and we're concerned, despite the many positive trends that we see. And first, it's worth underscoring, we have seen health declines in different countries facing different stresses. And nobody over 40 here in Ukraine can forget the economic and health consequences of the end of the Soviet Union, when male life expectancy fell by over a decade. And let's remind ourselves, it's still lower today than it was in 1987. Life expectancy here in Odessa today is shorter than 1987. Similarly, I now work in the US, and life expectancy in the US has declined for the first time in recorded history, and it's declined for 3 consecutive years. And those declines have been fueled by the opioid epidemics, by alcohol, by suicide, and by heart disease. In short, conditions of despair. Similarly, we're now seeing declines in life expectancy in post-industrial areas in the United Kingdom. And I think with their openness to rapid technological and social change, the Anglosphere countries may well be the canaries in the coal mine of the technological revolution. And it's worth underscoring that those who are excluded face multiple overlapping syndemics of deprivation and mental and physical illness. And just consider that severe mental illness is associated with double the risk of heart disease and triple the risk of respiratory deaths. And drug users typically die a full 2 decades before their peers, a full 2 decades earlier. The second reason I think there's so much concern is we're very likely to emerge from this current technological revolution more prosperous. But such revolutions are still wrenching. And it's worth reminding ourselves that the previous industrial revolution led to unprecedented and to exponential economic growth. But at the time, living standards halved. The third reason I think there's so much concern is averages conceal tails. And globally, we're richer than we've ever been, and yet we're seeing rapidly rising inequality, with most wealth gains accruing to the wealthiest, and with wage compression, casualization, and job insecurity increasingly common for less skilled and increasingly for skilled workers. And in tandem, we've seen declining social and income mobility. Income mobility rose progressively from the end of the World War to 1975, and then it stagnated, and it has declined since then. And I know of no more powerful way of illustrating this than turning your attention to the recent OECD report on the broken stepladder to social and economic equality. And what they do is they ask, how long will it take a society to enable its poorest 10% to reach the median, the middle of their economic level? And the answer is as follows. In Denmark, it's 2 years. In the rest of Scandinavia, in Denmark, it's 2 generations. In the rest of Scandinavia, it's 3 generations. In Australasia and Japan, it's 4 generations. In the United Kingdom and Ireland, 5. France and Germany, 6. India and China, 7. Brazil and South Africa, 9. And Colombia, 11. It would take 11 full generations for a Colombian in the lowest 10% of their income level to reach median levels. And what that really underscores is how much the staircase to social equality has stalled since 1975. And it's hard not to link it to the rise in tensions that we see in so many spheres of modern life. And finally, as Robert Putnam argues in his marvelous book, Our Kids, most post-war children in the West, many of us, lived lives far better than our parents. And yet, there's deep unease and some evidence that our kids may have diminishing prospects. So I think those 4 factors account for the fact that there's so much apprehension in an era of greater wealth and technological progress. So I'd like to ask ourselves, what are the determinants of a long and healthy life? And I would offer this simple definition in a nutshell. Good diet and exercise, ideally done with others, a network of family and friends, a stable, valued job, a home, and a sense of meaning or purpose. And if you accept that definition with me, let's explore how each of these factors is being influenced. And this conference has had so many good examples relating to diet and exercise, so I'll be brief here. But we all know how much they've been undermined globally by the loss of meal cultures and by the fast food industry. And we've now seen this move through society after society, through Latin America like a torch, into Africa and into Asia. And it's just the case that fast food is far more convenient and far cheaper than proper self-prepared food. And consider how much exercise is undermined by a myriad of factors, by a decline in urban environments, by an increase in physically strenuous, multiple, exhausting, but not necessarily healthy jobs. And the point I most want to underscore today, and worst of all, poor diet and poor exercise, overnutrition and under-exercise are intimately associated with lower education, lower socioeconomic status, lower opportunity. They are concentrated in the poorest communities. And the social geography of illness is a social geography of deprivation, post-industrial cities and forgotten rural areas. Let's turn to family and friends. And we all know how important they are for our health. But increasingly, a growth in social isolation bodes poorly for our health. 2 decades ago, Robert Putnam, who I've already cited, presciently charted how America's social networks, its social capital, in a phrase that he coined, had already eroded, prefiguring many of the reversals we see more starkly today. And in his powerful analogy, whereas post-war Americans joined bowling leagues and other social affinity groups, by the 1990s, in his phrase, they were bowling alone as membership of affinity groups plummeted. Putnam was clear about the cause, television, and he finds the internet and its virtual reality helmets, as he calls them, far more foreboding. And I recently witnessed this, living in the US for work purposes, across our street, as a very elderly US veteran became terminally ill. His Japanese wife had died a decade earlier, and he had few family. But he was a lifelong bowler, and during the last 2 weeks of his life, his bowling friends were seldom away from the house, and after his death, they spent 2 weeks finalizing and clearing his estate. He was in his 90s. It's hard to see that being reproduced in younger generations. And if we share Robert Putnam's conviction that television has displaced social capital, how much more powerful are the internet and the social media that we face today? How much more isolating are the worlds that they are building? How well have we understood their effects on young people before exposing them to them with virtually no guidance, and before we've understood their true impact? I'd like to turn briefly to the relationship between stable, valued jobs and wellness. And the link between unemployment and mental health is very well documented. And we all know that the technological revolution first destroyed blue-collar jobs and is now rapidly destroying white-collar jobs. And there's really no better way of illustrating this than by looking at the largest US company 20 years ago, AT&T, which employed over 400,000 people. Google today, 10 times as large, employs less than 40,000 people. So wealth creation and job creation are no longer linked. And we are on the fringes of Western Europe here. Turn our attention to Southern Europe. And a whole generation of young people in countries such as Spain, Portugal, and Greece will grow up without ever working, with youth unemployment in Spain and Greece peaking at 50%, and the jobs that are available increasingly being casualized. And take Australia. A third of jobs in Australia are now casualized. And if there's one statistic I would cite to anybody to understand the convulsions in the US today, it's this statistic. The share of the US economy that's paid in wages is lower than it's ever been since measurement began. The share of the US economy that's paid in wages is the lowest it's ever been since recording occurred, which means there's tremendous wealth creation and it's not being shared through wages. And if we were to turn to a home and home ownership, take one statistic. Among people in the UK aged 25 to 35, home ownership has fallen from 66% 20 years ago to 25% today. And having cited all these rather dystopian statistics, let me now turn to ask, what can we do? What can we do as communities, as cities, and as countries? And I want to begin with a homage to the health sector. And I want to be clear, there's a tremendous amount that the health sector can do to address these social challenges. Just take heart disease in the US. In the face of an epidemic of obesity and inequality in the US, heart deaths have still fallen by 75%, largely as a result of tobacco cessation and emergency hospital care. And look how much better countries in Europe and elsewhere now manage diabetes. So we want to be clear, the health sector has a vital role to play, and I don't mean to diminish it in any way. I also believe that scientific discovery, Bill Gates' great river of science, is going to give us better and better tools to address conditions, whether obesity, mental health, etc. But my focus today is on the social determinants. And I'd just like to turn to what we can do together, as this meeting has already done, to try and influence some of the challenges. And diet and exercise have been beautifully dealt with at this meeting. Getting on top of the fast food industry, one way or the other. Creating healthy cities and clean air. Critically important, but immensely difficult in many of the mega cities that we see globally. But I'd like to turn to what may be one of the most powerful interventions we have to improve health, and that's social equality. And the simple point is that more equal societies do better on virtually every measure of human progress. Many of those are in Europe. And Europe has 10% of global population, and yet it accounts for 2/3 of social spending. Now, this concerted social spending has allowed Europe to achieve much greater social equality, but it does require immensely high skills and productivity to sustain. So strong skills, strong institutions, strong macro-fiscal policies are essential if Europe is to redistribute its wealth as it does through social spending. And it's clear from what I'm saying that skills are the handmaiden of equality. But here, I mean skills for the many, not skills for the few. And the US and the UK do badly on this measure compared to Germany and many European countries. And in the US and the UK today, limited access to quality education is creating opportunity hoarding, where the children of the privileged will have opportunities that others can never access. So what can we do collectively to try to move towards greater equality? And here I also cite a marvelous series of OECD studies. The first thing we can do is provide universal health coverage so that illness doesn't drive families into poverty. Second, we need to invest in high-quality education for all, I emphasize, not just for the affluent. And we have to minimize school dropouts, which contribute so significantly to differential skills and employment opportunities. Thirdly, we've got to facilitate work participation for parents through high-quality childcare and high-quality early development programs, and increase equality of opportunity through more redistributive progressive tax policies. And then finally, something that I think is really relevant to this meeting, aggressively focus on spatial and regional disparities with cohesion funds, with coordinated development planning, and with inclusionary zoning policies. Take the value of work. There's no question in my mind that the German world, and indeed Australasia, do far better than the US and the UK in valuing all work, including manual and technical work. But nonetheless, the Industrial Revolution is going to continue to destroy jobs, and we're not going to have traditional employment as a source of self-worth in the ways that we've understood. We have to adapt to this, whether through flexible work, by recognizing and rewarding community services work, expanding social and care work, and moving towards a minimum basic assured income to ameliorate the technological change that's undoubtedly upon us. Let me turn to a difficult area, strengthening family and social support networks. Now, I don't pretend to know what to do or what we should do here, but I do know that, for example, countries such as France, which have very good free childcare and easy opportunities for women to return to the workforce, have fertility levels high above replacement, while countries like Germany, which have greater barriers in these areas, do not. And there's surely something to commend in an approach that allows women both to have children and to return effortlessly to the workplace knowing they're being cared for. But when it comes to caring for the aged, it's much harder. Singapore, always a laboratory for social engineering, provides tax incentives for children to live near their parents, the assumption being that they will care for them. And the economic assumption is certainly that children will care first. But we have no evidence whether this is working or not. So let me, in conclusion, say that, as I said at the outset, I'm immensely confident that the great river of science will continue to deliver greater health and greater prosperity. What I am concerned about is this technological and scientific revolution that we're all living through will ultimately bring immense benefits. But our ability socially and institutionally to respond to the wrenching changes that they're creating may not keep pace. And the question isn't whether we should embrace technological change, but how we ensure that our social policies, our educational policies, our institutions keep pace. And I am slightly pessimistic here that so many of our forces, whether political or financial, prioritize short-term horizons and immediate challenges. It's very difficult to find political bodies that can look beyond the short term to look at questions like these in today's world. And I'm also concerned because many of these challenges are also leading to deep anger, polarization, and populism, which makes it even harder to look beyond them to what we need to do. And finally, I think we all have a deep-seated tendency to fight the last war, not the present and future wars. And I think to some extent our social policy is still doing that. So my question in closing is how well will we collectively manage the technological revolution that we're all living through? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor David, very much. Thank you. Let me just find the notes. So, lastly, we almost come to an end. Now, for the final leg. So, each year, City Health Conference is held in a different place, in a different location. And the aims and principles remains the same, but the focus and flavor is slightly different depending on the circumstances and priorities for the local host. So for the next year, for 2019, we plan slightly change and organize 2 events that are separated but linked. First one will be European and second one will be held in Australia. So with regards to the European one, I would kindly like to invite Professor Jim McVeigh from Liverpool John Moores University to share more details with us.
Thank you, Kasia. I had prepared a short speech by way of an introduction to encourage people to come to Liverpool, but I'm finding it very difficult to follow David Wilson's lecture. I think if anything could capture the challenges that are facing us, it's that. And I think anything to follow that would dilute it. What I would say is that we have a great city in Liverpool. That's where we want you to come. You'll see a short film that will demonstrate that. But I would like to emphasize it's not just all about shopping and football and the Beatles. I mean, they all have an important part to play. But Liverpool, which you might not be aware of, has a unique history when it comes to public health. Dating back to the mid-19th century, modern public health was formed in Liverpool, and it was formed by the first public health physician, Dr. Duncan, the first environmental health officer, Thomas Fresh, and the first city engineer, James Newlands. And this supports completely what David was saying around the benefits for everyone need to come from different directions. The real benefits from health don't just come from health and healthcare. It's about bringing that partnership together. And based on that, the modern public health was built. Then in the 1980s, in the response to unprecedented levels of injecting drug use within Liverpool, Merseyside in general, and some specific parts in that, including Liverpool, our modern understanding of harm reduction was born. And there are a number of well-known people who were involved in that process. But I think one of the key things that isn't emphasized is all the different organizations that were represented in that movement. Obviously, there was health commissioning, there was the police, there was the church, the education, local authorities, academia. Many of these contributed an awful lot. Other ones just didn't block it. And sometimes that is all that needs to happen, that people allow good things to happen. So that feeds into the theme that we're planning. It's a work in progress, but we're looking at learning from experience and planning for the future. So how do we create the environment for those different organizations to come together? How do we create the environment for the new public health leaders to really find the traction that they need? And I think David's lecture really does capture what we need to do today around continuing those conversations. There's massive challenges, and no one organization or country are going to solve those. It's small incremental processes and how we will actually move these issues forward. So I just wanted to put a dampener on things saying that before we go to a very upbeat video. The conference will be great, but I'm sure you'll have a great time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I do really hope so that many of our participants would like to join us next year in Liverpool. And right now, let's watch for the video. So I hope if Jim didn't convince you, so at least this movie did. The second event that we are planning is to take place in Australia, but it's still at its early stage. We hope to do it in Melbourne, somewhere in September 2019. And it's sort of a testament to the growth of city health since 2012. That's now actually a global network. And taking conference to Australia, which is, well, far, far away from here, is like a clear statement of our intent to widen the participation, the knowledge, the skills based on the network as a whole. So we are looking forward to see you in Australia as well. So, all that's left for me is to express my very special thanks to both, to the organizers and the local hosts, and I will do my best to do it in Russian. So, я бы хотела сказать большое спасибо всем организаторам городу Одесса, Альянсу общественного здоровья, FU International за поддержку, за сердце, за сотрудничество. Ну, ребята, без вас это событие не состоялось бы вообще. Так что надеюсь, что увидимся на следующий год либо в Ливерпуле, либо в Австралии, а лучше во всех местах. So I would like to, on the behalf of my team, to thanks to the city of Odessa, to the Alliance for the Public Health, FU International, for all the support, for the warmth and hospitality that we received. And I would like to say thank you to the committee members that helped us to create this excellent program for this day. And especially I would like to thanks to our participants. So the City Health Conference 2018 is officially closed. But as an organizer, I still have few information to pass. Well, the first one is that within a few hours or a few days, we will open the feedback form that we would kindly ask you to fill in, as it helps us to make this event a better event. Then, with regards to check-in in this hotel, for those who are staying in this hotel, it's until 12. And the third thing is with regards to the airport transport. Unfortunately, we do not provide it, but we can help you to order taxis and to sort those things up. So, thank you very much.